Aria, as you say, Alam, Yamlinji, Rimba, Korim, Yavati, and in Dambo, and Chugitushene, Yawas Alco Wache, and Gorim Havati, Tambodi, and Yamlenji, and Yamsulia, and Dicelia, and Nivetus, Nim to say Korim Gene, goes to sing them to Namores. Says that Dinigi. Dambo Yamsulia, Korim, Dambo, the Alcoas, Dambo, Kangasam, that did Dambo Yamsuliango Cherry, Chet, EGS, and anything Yamsulingis, and because some those in that town, Tony, in any Dambotin Yamsling Koreas, or those in Yamsulimbaina, and the Korim, and the Takach Yamsulene, and Yamedi, Yaki Yakuris. The Mena, Casotini, those in a Korim, the upper how coach in Yamsuleno, then a Korim, my Shibi, Shiji, my body, and a young body, as such, on kissing out the Teneke Shiroda.
Good evening. The last week, we looked at how one needs to come to understand the stages of training in order to cultivate art within oneself, where one must start, and how one progresses. So this needs to come to be known, and then one needs to actually train in that sequence, not merely having gathered the information and then training in the way that one feels drawn towards. Then, if one does do as is presented, as was presented, which is gather knowledge and train in the way that is being presented to you, then your training will go well. Then, as we saw, the secondary affliction of non-vigilance will not increase. In other words, it will not arise.
Adeni Luki Labanyamba Sonata, and the same Labanyamba Sonasati, mine also Chini Ungure, and the Nezadin then again to get same Labanyamba Sonadera, in a Nachi Nami or the Metawa Sada, and then maybe Jawal Micheva Power, and the Jawa Chipi Gasota, Rangi Kunolia, that's all as Tower, his Tapachi or such, or the Negi as Jungore, the Nezada Delma. That is the idea, Nami go to Metan Asia. That not your mother says the sugar tinma.
Tonight, we'll look at verses all with their own respective sub-outline. First we'll look at is about ensuring that the body as well as the mind does not fall under the control of distractions. Then the second is about abandoning meaningless activities. And the third is the analyzing the motivation at the time of an activity. The 45th verse in the 5th chapter. Pointless conversations on various topics and captivating entertainment of numerous types, if required to engage with anyone, anywhere, attachment to those must be abandoned.
Drum Denegi, chick the ass, don't that maybe drum not so much your water, Denegi to make them not so much your race. She said, Dene Zada, Denegi, and Nagu Gone, that don't that maybe them Tamaratipa, she your marriage or to make them the Nasos, the Naso of your teachers to send she your marriage.
At first, that of pointless conversations. So pointless in the sense of being of no particular value. Literally, telling about comings and goings in society or in your own life, this story and that story, all these various conversations that can consume our time and our mind. Things that really, when we look closely, have no value, are pointless. These ought to be refrained from.
Same number yen, and the same yen, and the Jike dam Jike or same yen, the same number yen you won't get, the niggas, and the Chikdam Dhamara Shake, you shoot a masona, Chikmangoji Tala to go to Tala Rugurwa, and the Jiking Nacha to Gorwa, 나캬차 나캬차나 나캬딩 하주 나기 미게어와 베네 주인 참아 치도 나캬세 차거라 제자디네 자디 파송고리에서 대송에서 나캬송아 차르고 제잔 되메기 되메 땀도 나미 베땀 나캬디기 파시겨 말했디 송고리에서 대제 디송고에자 다디가르세네 되네게 된다미 베땀 나캬 땀지 셴 되바나 지나네 딩아캬 디바리 안디 안지 뒤시 천라도야 망보지 뒤시 계신 소수기 기회념이 제발에 발시지고로와 어찌단 인도시 제자디 나캬 영야디 가르치는 셈 남미 송신 셔체진 남미기 와도 송지 되네게 다마라도 좀 셔딩 거를 제자디니자 되네가 되네게 셔야디 파 잠샤오 시켜 말에 송고고리에서
The conversing, engaging in conversation on pointless topics, this is to be avoided because of the distraction that it creates. At the very least, it consumes our time whilst we are engaging in these various conversations that have no real value, about topics of no real value. So at the very least, they consume our time whilst we are in conversation. But what's much more likely is that after the conversation ends, our mind will still be quite excited or distracted by these topics that we had been discussing. To this, you would have heard in the other context of the 10 non-virtues, where this is the same as that of idle speech, which comes down to engaging in conversation about things of no real value. And where this is harmful for spiritual practitioners is it consumes our time, distracts our mind, and thereby, because of these two, time being consumed and our mind being distracted, serves as an obstacle to the accumulation of virtue. And that's even separate if what one is talking about leads to the accumulation of non-virtue, one's mind is becoming afflicted. So even if the mind is not becoming afflicted, because of wasting of time, because of distraction, and it serves as an obstacle to the accumulation of virtue.
that do make it not damn the radio minutos in it, some Tawa, then our then big part change the muscle teaching me and big Shena, Jigmares and Besson and do she and be change some rises that didn't get shake your said the road.
The way to ensure that one does not engage in pointless conversations on any of the various topics is to rely on vigilance and mindfulness, where vigilance will notice, hang on, here I am engaging in conversation about something of no real value, that has no real meaning. Vigilance notices this. Mindfulness then reminds one of the fault of this. I'm wasting my time. I'm distracting my mind from something of value. And rather, I should withdraw myself from this conversation. And then one does so. So in this way, vigilance and mindfulness serves to ensure that we don't waste our lives in pointless conversations.
was a demo Mongolia take your matters and was if demo said that the niggy Benediction and Tabia loss of Badan, the nigget, she demoda Mara Yorvada, the niggy, David, the nigget demolia take your matters. The Vena Carrion was in the jet, the Charan Kiagi, Yanga, and the main big that's Chica Sem Pat Del Payan, and also Kijanium Nochelia, into suit, and the chicken, Cholata and also about the chipade, and the niggy. And the model Tabian Chataya Piagi, Yamayo Rotiniza, on was a Timona Sopala take your mares.
And for similar reasons, one's also to avoid the second line, captivating entertainment of numerous types. So in a modern world, entertainment is expressed in many different ways. We hear that dangers were similar to engaging in pointless conversation in that one's time can be consumed. One's mind is drawn up in the delights of what one is, in this case, appropriately seeing, whereas before it would be what one is hearing. So instead, one's mind is being drawn into these worlds that are presented, or these illusions that are presented by captivating entertainment. And this distracts one. And that distraction may not only be for the time of watching the captivating entertainment, but one may well be thinking about it long afterwards, and as well as telling others too. And in this way, we can see how one's mind one's time can be lost, can be consumed in this way. And moreover, it's also very likely that attachment will arise. Hence, the entertainment is not tedious, but captivating.
Internet, mobile, TV, that demota marade or what a bene, or denicate them on the sober touching, denicate them mogi, that bene, or denicate them more than demotelia, dinner cohort bed, demotile charge, cha, denitian, and the Tashiano sobada, denitem the cohort hedge, cohort want to sonjagic, so game. 联合个就会救助呀，老说话的，那是原本现在说这种国外的呢，咱当然这个给人家们去看的，先就是第一个是东岸的社会，在东岸买下来呀，那那个俺这出来全部的也是我的，这呢咱当我是为电马那说，忙不着嘛的这出也，带给我们的送过的也是。
This advice is really pertinent in our modern world. Because if we think of the world of ancient India, when entertainment that was captivating came one's way, this would have been quite rare. Whereas today, entertainment is always just at our fingertips. We take our phone or we look at our televisions. We have an abundant sources of entertainment which captivate the mind. And in this way, the potential for this life gets wasted. It gets wasted in our seeking of pleasure through consuming distraction after distraction. And in this way, the lasting, stable happiness that we are seeking can never be found. And instead, our life will just pass us by.
that I'm sure that dinner what dinner shinang jugim that chiki she la sopa that diniki that don't make it dam la sopa that diniki zira sopa diniki and then yango maresa diniki that yembaina and that chauchuki that chi dam la sopa that diniki she la sopa that diniki yambana gazi mangbun yemba dele din dona maybe tone and then Gabriela Chawakia, Gabriela Kondokia, and then Denigi, and the Chike, and no more Suzuki, and no more pay a Chagorwa, Dineza, and Dona maybe Denigi, and now you I'm Juitia, and Deniki, Yancy loss of a Chalanki, you, she, Jatiki, Yankio Mare, such Deniyama de Sungu, was a Sungu, Dona, that you send which you got.
These two lines, then together, we see how the first one is specifically about engaging in conversation, so we can understand, this will be, we can take in a broad way things that one hears, and in the second line, we can take, again, mainly about things that one watches. And so just in our modern context, we can see how there's so much that can distract us, that is captivating. It's not just watching the entertainment on our phones or televisions, but it can be going to shows, it can be listening to music, all of these ways that we keep our mind distracted away from topics of the Dharma. Our mind then stays consumed by things of no real value. And we end up not living a life of great meaning, but rather we just strengthen our habituation to our afflictions such as distraction, attachment, and so forth. In this way, the potential of this life is never going to be achieved, and this life will end up just passing by as a life of wasted opportunity.
미메나 녀만의 때모대야 다 되는 해디 미션다 코로 미션다 되는 녀고 미션다기 때모 차별해서 동고로 다대사 소수기 라도 커버 여바 인자 아니 가오드나 소수 지부되어 나가서 디나데는 직 senior 다마라다 신직 차주기 셰라서바 다마르냐 로서바 예들와 엔디네게 베네 senior 주마라서 망보니에 디이진진 소수 셈 초제고 집배 지 노트쉐게 망부용고로와다 견주치 알아서바 단 콘더서 알아서바다 이네게 아직 가시기 지게 내가 두제전에 제일 때에 지수이라자다 배야부 춘샤선배 지수이라제 대치선 이네게 년비 진이 토능하라 줄이야 디바 사용으로와 안디네게 데모달라 소바다 이네게 토네 어두 시반자 디네 이제 찾아다 언제게 안데 지금 나 메비기 지금 데모다마라 타야라 소바다 Dena maybe ne denegi etike tamnyana sobat damara la soba ye digi ba zemgu kuries di mazemba ina anjukula ane chadang ge yongure chadang ge ba ina namye ye namye ge wado song de chadang ge dine chadang ge de sosugi tipa sa yongures chesa suzuki we dine tipa sa maze dine ge tabi tüsürün sosugi jenyamna chebal tüsü chonatan gore dine ezada tishasan dushene ba jegyo ma de song kuries chesa Dona maybe demo na soba taya la soba dona maybe ne janya la sonda soba nya la soba odusin dona maybe and demige tik geshe mangbo dosin dam la soba ba xie chaza and dosin and songgo res namye wando ma tongwa shi songgo re dian da sonai de je xie xingi denige tu yongde min che ba che den jembigi oda din chen tik ma re sem songgo chawo re de somba inda so sugi na go ne ane karsore tipo scientific songorwa inezade kunla kasaure jeme tamni la so tang mo sa ti mon nam mang bos chasane tu shin songore es nam ya won do ma tawa chine dan shi shin de songore es songore
I encourage you to recognize just how radically different our modern world is from what was considered normal at the time that this text was composed and for many centuries thereafter. Back then, the opportunity to hear and to engage in entertainment would have been very rare and would have been quite a special event when perhaps there were traveling minstrels and one would hear instruments and trained singers or to see skilled actors. This was very rare, and it's something that would come by perhaps a few times a year if one were fortunate. Now, we have such distractions at our fingertips, and we engage with such distractions perhaps every single day. We need to recognize what we know to be true, which is that our modern world is designed to grab our attention, to distract us, and to generate our passions of attachment and anger. And in this way, our life gets consumed in distraction in a way that would be quite difficult to recall. In the distant past, these distractions were not at all abundant like they are now. For us, it's very easy to waste our lives, ending this life with our afflictions strengthened rather than bad. What it should be rather striving for is to create a rich inner world and to have our focus be on the topics of the Dharma rather than on the outer world, these various expressions of distraction that draw us in circle. the very fact that you are here means that you recognize that there are certain things that have real value and are not found elsewhere. Recognizing then that certain things have value, embrace those. Try and have those as being dominant in your mind. And the way to do so is to make, firstly, to recognize this, and then secondly, to make a commitment to let go of what has no real value, and to recognize that its attractiveness, its apparent power to draw one in, is a sign of the strength of one's habituation and afflictions. Thereby, recognizing that, thereby, one can guard one's mind well with vigilance and mindfulness, rather letting go of what draws one in habitually, and embrace the new cultivation of the minds of the Dharma, keeping them at the forefront of one's mind, rather than pointless conversations and captivating entertainment.
The social attenda came in the Shelia, Pembe Chedo, and Tam Tarastenda Meva Tam Shea La Sopata. And the Denegi, and the chick the atmosphere Timote over the in the Yunguri or Kuna Chupotuanas.
The third line, if required to engage with anyone, anywhere. So this, if required to, this points to that there may be times when one is required to engage with others or with circumstance, with entertainment, but this is for the sake of benefiting others. So there one needs to recognize whether one's motivation is genuinely to benefit others rather than one's attachment is leading to an excuse arising. So there may well be particular times when one is required to engage.
Kunla Chubur Cubana said the Queen said that in a Tamna Soba share and Demotamala Soba. That Tamna Soba to make a Tam share La Soba, depending on the Minerva Rosina, Nacolia, and a chicken, go chick, go Najik never road and gang all over that in the end of the chick to see my Javakanga de Consulia. Then on the chick Pembe, some Consulia, and the chick does similarly. Denegi and the Chige, Yondalia, and Drum Road at Chitinite Casort that Chick Drum Damara Chitine, Gemalai, Drum Rosik, Dosine, Shena, and the Jigresi Rosia, Shena, that she a Denegi, she acquires Hagruat and Shewa Yungurua.
Such situations where one needs to, may need to be required to engage with anyone, anywhere, could be, for example, if you know someone is ill, and perhaps they're experiencing a lot of fear, or someone else is lonely, or someone is old and feeling forgotten by their family and by society. Then, knowing that these are people in need, you go and spend time with them. But perhaps they may not be very interested in your accounts of the Dharma and your discussion of virtue and non-virtue. For them, for their sake, you may rather watch entertainment with them, listen to pleasing music, or engage in conversation, which in another context would be considered pointless. But here it has a specific purpose. Talking to someone about their youth, talking to them about days gone by, helping to deal with their loneliness. In this way, one is sincerely engaging with others in a way to benefit them. And then what topics of conversation or usage of entertainment is there genuinely to benefit others.
On the negative Tamna Soba Dusine Shanlia, Hembe, Shania Dusine, our Shia Muries, and in there, Jinga demo, associate the negative Chictam. Demona soba in the Mosaic Demotige, then Tawa Chagres, Caresinaji made the Shevana Shinje, and chicken gola, the negative one, and Chipuru is the consulia, and Zik, Diki Yonata Consul, the same Heliaga and the parties and the Consulia, paying to do change demo attach to stem and that's the netamota tidius in a tower or the Tongrua, just a dinigi, Consulia Tishi Tinik, demo Mosevit, demo, and the Gemalada, to Hula Chai, Tinik Demoraji. To start teaching, that's also a Tongora. Just that in is a Shangi, Shelley Pembichu, Shangi, and Shangi Mosong Chesil, that Consulia, Consunium to Doshan to stay, Consul Pembich to teach and Yamdo, that way the Yunguri is or.
One does need to engage with others in this way and be very sure of your motivation. And then expressions would be, for example, someone who you know is alone. If they enjoy sport and their team is in an important match, then you can go and watch with them and cheer for their team. And you know in this way, at least you'll be bringing some temporary happiness to someone who so often feels ignored and neglected. Or similarly, you may watch a favorite film with them, talk about the characters and the plot, or listen to music which you know attaches there. And in this way, connect with others. You benefit those in need. So these are the kinds of exceptions that are genuinely for the benefit of others.
That they can go down, then they get caught simply charged to do, and the share Yamara down at loss of a down to Yanchu a loss of butter, and the boards in the denegate, check it, she down Yanchu a loss of a consul that simply chat and consulia, chick sim kiwi, I get to you, I get Tondala, to send a share down in Yanchu, that's also in a go to Guranye, to Tudura. Just I didn't couple Shangi, Pando, some da Shangi, and some Danye, but she Dutch consulators, Yanjudu, and so say Shanyan boy Chagorwa, Shanye Murata. Then is that in the Tinigi, that Shanley Pembe, should have shed the year to be a good Tondala, and she has some Hulu Chagat Tondala, and they do send that chicken shed sick them near La Sobatan. And the chicken, that's what the Aji. That been can go to the cross the Aji Tumro, Shena, Bejikin Aji, she give her a the new consulted out, the next set of consulting Coron and Sim Hella and the consultum Shen as all that Yawodu Sinyamba in the Uncoron Lulu Chada, and the Coron to shoot again, Sim Maki will never sim Lula Chayungora, and the need on a chick Shangi. Digi on Shelley Pembe or some Taje, so she get that them not so many Malos of Bada, the Yunguri is order.
A key point for this is to be very sure of your motivation, that you are engaging with others for their sake, that this isn't about what you want to do. So these illustrations hopefully make that clear, where you go and you watch, say, a film that means a lot to someone that they haven't seen for a long time, or you watch sport with them, if it's their favorite team, or you listen to music from the youth if they enjoy that, or you speak about the good old days, sharing stories or listening to stories from their youth, or perhaps looking at photo albums of people perhaps you don't know, but for this person, this is a really, really meaningful interaction. They're feeling valued, they're feeling cared for, they're feeling like they matter. So engaging in interactions with others like this is good to do. And especially then, when one's motivation is very clear. This isn't what you're doing for yourself, but this is what you're doing to help ease the suffering of someone else and to strengthen your connection with them. So clearly, these are activities to benefit others. And it may also involve, for example, looking after children, to help someone who needs support in this way. So there are varying ways, but the key point is that this isn't about not allowing one's attachment to deceive one and thereby justify things that should be best avoided.
Just that Kunla Chukur Cuba and Della Chapa Jas is a Kunla city, Shanley Pemba, the Shangi, and the Shangi, Lusim, Hulu Chayat, Shanley, Pembe Chedo, and the Dam Nasopa Sheva, Nick Chicket to make it dam, and those Pasha La Sopatang. And then, and Chigi, the Negi, and the Chigi, Agoso, the Demo Mosawa, Dago, La Sopa, the Negi, and the Yellow Sopa near Nyambalos, Chasa, the Negi. Gabriel Yungris, Denegi, JB Kabla, Yella, and Sosorangi, Shenlia Pemba, Conjugate Dondala, this Jeva Mato, Society, Chawaki Maria, Chesa, Damla Chawakia, Demo de la Chawakia, and Jania Chawaki Maria, Chesa Dele, and Della Chawaponga's house, Susuki Chawamaji or Eswell.
The fourth line, attachment to those must be abandoned. So this is when one is engaging with others, that one should, for the sake of others, be sure that attachment doesn't arise. Be assured your motivation isn't one of attachment expressed as self-interest, but covered as, or being excused as being for the sake of others. And if one is engaging in conversation for the benefit of others, that conversation will not be pointless. If one is watching entertainment for the sake of others, one's not going to be captivated by that entertainment in the same way, because you are more focused on the impact you are having on this person next to you, rather than being caught up in the excitement of the entertainment. So in this way, one's conversation is not without value. One's watching of entertainment isn't without value. So this then is a key measure of whether one is engaging without attachment or not.
And demo delation and you send a pen page to demo demo died, tell a bear what the Chawakisona, then is Shema Shen the Panbamena, Rangi don't do in a yan, Yanet Asher, Yanga, your dinner is that Chawaki, your Mardelia, or that Chawamaji, yes, and I did it.
Whilst you are engaging with others in this way to be of benefit, then you just keep watching your mind to ensure you're not getting too drawn into perhaps the entertainment you're watching or the music you're listening to, so that attachment isn't arising and thereby your motivation being tainted. Rather, keep your focus on this person that you are benefiting. You will still get great enjoyment in the conversation or in the entertainment, but that enjoyment will be in the happiness you are bringing into the life of this person. And in this way, you'll be able to engage in this and similar activities without fear or without danger of attachment arising, as long as you ensure that your motivation stays dominant throughout your interaction.
Son Jake Shigio Mare, Mose Demolaso, the name of Tegio Mare, and Dayati Nigio Mares, Dusin Chidan to Shigio Mares. Then Shen, Pembe should Shen, you don't dolly some Shen Chidu Chevaina, or Dele, Deniki Dam Damo Lasobatam, then to make a Dam Sheba, and Mose Demo Dava, Dala Sobanyamba Chevaina. Shen, you don't have Pembe sim to change in the Shena, Jiggerity in a daily associate. And Danda and Danyenda and Jiki Demola Sutil, Chapaki Mares, make your subject already, so Sukita, Chapakis and Mikisamaras and Bigita, Chapakin and Timarada and Big some Dajin, the chamber, the Session that can be tangent of Dusin, Chapaki Mares as or rather.
So that goes this 45th book guards us against engaging in things which have no real value, pointless conversations, captivating entertainment. These really take to heart because in our modern world, there are such powerful forces pulling us in this direction because it is so readily available. To recognize the faults that follow from living like this, that our afflictions arise, at the very least, that of distraction, almost certainly attachment. Moreover, our opportunity to accumulate merit is lost. And quite a danger is that we strengthen our habituation to seeking happiness in places where actual happiness can never be found. So with our intelligence, our wisdom, we need to recognize that these objects of attachment, our phones, our television, and so forth, these can never lead to lasting happiness. We recognize this well, and we employ vigilance and mindfulness to guard out. And similarly, by utilizing our wisdom, we know when there are times when we can engage, when we need to engage for the sake of others, but we ensure our motivation is not dominated by attachment, and that we keep this motivation present throughout the activity, that motivation of wanting to benefit this person. What we're being advised to do in this steps is to take a balanced approach. But this is difficult to do. It's difficult to achieve because our habituation to distraction, to pleasure through external sources, in particular through what one hears, whether it's music or conversation, and what one sees, such as on our phones. This habituation to this is something that's deeply ingrained with us from our childhood throughout our lifetimes. Everyone here grew up with these forms of entertainment, and our culture from then to now has encouraged us and seen it as a worthwhile way to spend our time, relaxing, de-stressing in this manner. And in fact, those who create the entertainment, whether it's those who write music or those who create the TV shows, they do so in a manner that people will enjoy. Or as from the Buddhist perspective, they do so in a manner that attachment will arise. And it's this attachment that keeps drawing us back, and it's our attachment that makes us feel anxious or apprehensive when we cannot engage and fulfill our attachment. So we need to think along these lines again and again, repeatedly. So what we are being encouraged here to do is to develop our wisdom or our intelligence. And this requires repeated analysis so that we can come to see with vivid clarity the faults of continuing to have powers consumed in pointless conversations and captivating entertainment. And recognize that whilst we are doing so outwards, the way our mind feels is not quite the same as when we've been reading a Dharma book, hearing teachings, engaging in meditation. Recognize all these different classes of behavior. One is very much in accordance with what is a meaningful life, and one is actually an obstacle to living that meaningful life. And that which is the obstacle is also greatly justified by our culture, by our attachment, and therefore is very difficult to set aside. And because it is so difficult to set aside, we need to reflect on this again and again to get a balanced perspective. And as we are letting go, to keep looking carefully to ensure that we are keeping a balanced perspective. We need to come to see that the faults of engaging in pointless conversations and captivating entertainment far outweigh any benefit of doing so. So what we are trying to do is develop our wisdom to the extent that it massively outweighs our current very great attachment to consuming our life like this.
Anda döme bege jawa chuba pongwa sa dire ima döme sago tsaje dang sari ji so ji yurna de she la ba den che ne ta pi yi de me la toros.
And similar to this is now the 46th verse, which is abandoning meaningless activities. When for no meaningful purpose you scratch in soil, pull up grass, trace patterns on the ground, and so forth, recall the trainings of a Sagata, and out of fear, abandon that immediately. These first two lines then give illustrations of what clearly are activities with no real meaning. Scratching in soil, pulling up grass, tracing patterns in the ground.
Just now that maybe a Sako Ila Soba didn't you wanted you name an Amazuki Kishi Rasha Dush and the Lapigidus, the Geshe to the Sadusu Kosha, the Koala Sobada, you are Zaro, a cheap house to Venezaru, Womborochin, Pacoe, La Soba, in the Pazu de Shin Yaga La Soba, other Chana to La Soba, the new water, she then just segured, and that may be get a Sako Ila Sobada. And that's a Chivala Secure Maria said.
In ancient time, like one would imagine, friends sitting around together outside and without being very mindful, they could do things such as scratching the soil, pulling up grass, tracing patterns on the ground. It must may sound a little odd, not so different from what we do in our modern context. Maybe doodling one's vocal or fidgeting and tracing patterns in some other way. So these refer to mindless activities or intentionless without being activities without being mindful.
Mola soba chigyo mare ndoshin chipa lava nan do chigyo mare sin sonsha barwa sonsha banza deni ge somba de sanye ge deni labje sonyo re sembe da labje de ba den che ndoshin da labje de na kawa ina deni sanye labje da kebe ge da ni divasa gore de dibe lewo jebo man ma oba da tunga yung cha gre sembe deni ge da la dijin shebe sonji la ba den che jamba che deni dembe Tenno audience Bakatan Garudu Sembelamsa, Odinitic Mars, Java Tinik, Java Kich and then Merla Torus Lamsa, Dusin the Tamsha Ores or Machebacha.
So when one notices that one is acting without awareness or behaving without awareness. The third line, recall the teaching, the trainings of the Sagata. In other words, remind oneself of the teachings of the Buddha, which present what actually has value in the world, what has great meaning. And therefore, let go of these distractions. Do not allow yourself to continue in distraction. And do so without delay. That's the fourth line. Out of fear, abandon them immediately. Immediately let go of what seems like, maybe you could say, innocent expressions of distraction, and let go of them. Don't follow them anymore. Rather, turn your mind with intention to what has value, what has meaning.
Maybe Sakoya Toba Sachiba Chigio Maria Sumada Dunda, Yuna, that Sakona, and it in degree, such in a degree, or up in that, San Yachim Nandian, near Hortiga, Samos Ugores, and your Horton or Chawas, and Gorches, Samos Ugores, Chesatanga to combat and to go on La Sopa, Denegi, near Hortiga, Chidden La Sopa, in your Holia, Denegi, Chiki Sat Barbur, Tobo Yevada, Denegi, and the Chetala Sopa, and the Chitava Kidubane, and Chidu and Shan Chiki Deneke, Samaswagi Chedo, and there's Sakoya La Sopa, that's Sakobana, then Titu, Shan Yi $10, Shan Yi $10, and the Shan and Jimmy to Salamgadi in the Lamgadi, La Pomedina, and Sako on a coach in the Lamga and Chiki Hawasuala Sopata, in Lamgala Padrosala, Sagi captured the Kamayu and the Setiki to the other Sovane, Shangi, Shanli, a Pembi should Shangi to do, and the Chiki. 去短大的先一偏北短大了呀，那少过他这些把那说白呢，还是这个也是生活嘛，对呢，对面是短大没把了，真的是靠嘛的是，对短大没把钱呢，那也过嘛的是，但短大有把钱，对，考虑对那个先来偏北去的，考虑怎么学的，对那个光把它确定的，他讲了说白，然后怎么学短大了。都是呢，少过来了，过过来，他再结果把那说把掐出呢，那这个也是生活等等了。
First line has the key component of this verse, which is for no meaningful purpose. Because sometimes one may need to do some of these activities or other activities which could be meaningless, but for a specific purpose, a meaningful purpose. For example, one may want to pull up grass if it's growing between paving. And this would rather be an expression of wanting to have a path which yourself and others use not to get damaged. Or one would clean our gonpekya, clean up place of meditation, clean one's home, one's environment. These such things are done for a purpose, as opposed to just a physical expression of a distracted mind. But the general delineation would be, is this beneficial or not? Does it bring benefit to others or not? And bringing benefit to others can be direct, for example, cleaning this communal space, this ganga, or it can be indirect. For example, one cleans one's own meditation room, but through the qualities one will develop in one's mind there, one will bring benefits to all others. But what we need to abandon is what lacks meaning, has no meaningful purpose, and rather engage in things with a meaningful manner. That engaging in activities in a meaningful manner refers to having a meaningful motivation of purpose, of meaning. So this then is the 47th verse. Whenever wishing to move or just wanting to speak, first examine your own mind, and then consistently do what is appropriate.
Dini Pash, Piggy Mirror, Session Dorje, you have a double color, so some Nalia, Garrison to what a penny to settle, China to the and the Chigi, Yang Jim Mahalo, Conan to the Chigi, Dinin Nagaro Shin to the Ajig got Pa Chigi Chamachi, Dinis, some to the that Lucian, Agonol Pata, or yes, said the young opening as a Pichiputodi. Penny child, the penny demo, I should tell you, said, consecution yambo, she would deal part charging her till to win some daje. Chick to Ayungurwa, then penny charge you did a charge to Ayungurwa. Yeah, penny to a sort of corner, the piggy got the you said the cigarettes but chip Miduja said the corner, I added some dash to Ayungurwa. I didn't didn't remember Suzuki, Suzuki. Chigi and then I didn't get on a Suzuki Zubi Yam doing a turn and I said, oh, consider dictate with Chick to the Dorje and Guruadine. And Yaji paid the layer Chick to Shinja, and meeting bus here, the Niggy some that Dorje and Guru, that's over Yunguruada, said Angele, do send part draw Eddie, Ajian, Ajuadilia, Pembe some Dapri, Robert Yoga, then Ganga, you did Robert, some that Dorje and Guruada, Mima, Chias at the Dorje. And then Gabriel Chavi won't go try Gabriel and the Condo won't go try Gabriel young Nigeta, the Niggy Tony something to try Gabriel Pembe something try not so much Yungurwa. The name is that you know the Subo the Passo Draggy didn't draw a sempicate drag lay out the Tambokunolia and some non had a cut a penny to away some got a dash at the Kunon by Chevache or has Chevache. The nature of Kunolia. Chaba Chabita, Chada, Yomo Bushik, Sonch, Yomo Kunos, Yomo on the drag, some of our Horsona, or did Yoma spend part in the Mado at your head over that. In that area, Shelly, Pembe, some of the Pando Shake, some of Kuno Tony, to you, but didn't run at you, says Murwa, Chesadineke, Council Gilbert to your lecture, said.
Chica.
Auntie got Tambody.
Look at the first line, whenever wishing to move. So the body moves independent on an intention from the mind. Here, with mindfulness and vigilance, be aware of that intention as opposed to just moving. Be aware of what your motivation is. So this really refers more to when one is setting up on embarking on something, perhaps going somewhere. Look carefully at your motivation. And as mentioned with the two verses before earlier in the class, look genuinely at one's motivation. Watch out for attachment deceiving you about what your motivation is, presenting it as something wholesome for the benefit of others, when really you are going somewhere because you want to show off your skills or your talents, or you want to be with others that greatly admire you, or something afflicted like that. To be very aware of what your motivation is and to do so and utilize vigilance and mindfulness. And if you notice your motivation is afflicted, do not go. Rather, stay where you are and deal with your mind, prove your heart. If your motivation is genuinely to be of benefit to others, to help others, then go and do so, again, as we saw earlier, without attachment. So the motivation is to bring benefit to others, and any pleasure one takes will be in the benefit others are receiving. So this is important for moving. Watch your motivation. Be very aware of what your motivation is.
Is a on the Begidua, Yama, mobile phone to get on board or the new Komburwa. Is that then? Chicky Michele Punch, your sort of doom cheer that Michele Point and what you are rather do a Komburwa. Says I, me punch you there. Query me send out a year or a tongue or rather. That you did could a small penny to Geshe doing and penny or teacher, Mother Ponta and go hard as Geshe today, mission of penny Ponta, and upon the year danger as a Geshe listen. Says I go point the year to the woman, send out a mom job or a mom tongue or says that the council doing to your teacher, the council didn't. As you call draw some does it, you to penny to the draw water. Join the Dangal Palace and the kitchen and upon Basha Labje. That's what to teacher. Did you good to roast? They are right in that.
So think back to not that many years ago when mobile phones were rare. Then one can imagine a situation when you were perhaps one of the few in your group who had a phone. And then you may well make an arrangement that you want to impress this person that you're going to be with. So you make an arrangement with another friend. I'm going to meet this other friend that I'll write here cracks, although you wouldn't quite say it like that. Please phone in, say, 15 minutes or in an hour when I'm with that. And they phone in for no real reason other than you want to pull your phone out of your pocket or your bag and to talk about something of no real importance, but just to impress this other person. So there one is heading out, but doing so with the motivation of wanting to impress someone else. There this needs to be recognized and abandoned, and rather than one should not leave.
Moral development, na yang sen, da yang ji ki xie lia, xian da lia, ji xie hui na. Dine ge xie ge samlo de lia, gong lo de lia, da ji cha tang wang ge xie de, cha bei wang ge xie de, yang ji xie ile ma ga wa tang ye samlo dan de xie de, yang ji mi ya ji pa cha ma ji mi tun ba le ya, mi tun ba xue ge xie de, du xie ne, dan du xie ne da huo de gong lo de lia. yang ji so so ge da ji xie di xian li ya pen bei sam le tian xi yu de de ni ge xie ban ne xian de le pen sa le be ne sa le sen bi ge da so so ge yang ga bi le pen bei sam le xie ban ne pa jo de li ya pen de za le ne ji yong gu lu wa xie zai de ne za de ya ji ne ne ji ge ma ra de ne za da so so ge ji xi xie le pa xian le xie ge sam le ko de de ye le gong lo de le so so ge sam lo di xie gong lo de cha bei wang cha pa ki de cha bei wang ge de ya da wei wang ge de 차마지게 삼비기 녀목 원도 손도 예습에 삼다야다 데네기 다랑게 시에게 삼는 공로디 셴레 펜베 삼는 공로 코드에 가르제스면 도시네 당보마 신예래야 수수 공로야 근데 심주시 오레스 심주시 데네야 지 예, 차베 원도 손세 디 근데 시에게 공로디네 차다시 공로 교대 샘 코드에 바이나 데네 시에게 말레스 데마 바 송고레스 송고 마을 되나야스
Secondly, just wanting to speak. So you got to, before speaking, watch your motivation. Check your motivation. You may be surprised how often one's motivation thereby show off the depths of your wisdom. And one may want to quickly cut in and share one's own stories or experiences that you find so captivating. In all these instances, we need to be aware of our motivation, because if we are, and we are sincere as a practitioner, we will stop. We will rather refrain from speaking, recognizing that these are just various expressions of pride and attachment and so forth. To hear it, perhaps even more so with movement, with our speech, we need to watch our motivation.
ane sosege ane chingyo mo pe wando sonde do mindu so do shin ya kunlo dangbo range semla tak se tini gi jo de ba dang kunlo mo de be yin le kunlo la ya range semna la ya in samlo kan is ko do do shin samlo del ba do shin ta se ko res se za dini gi ta ne tembe ri ba tembar cha se de ne ge do sta chi ne tembo che che dini yo mo bo wando son ba na den din ba su bu jo ya da dini ke 어두 송고 줘야 등감에 와디 송바체 송체 데네 근데 지기 셴리에 펜베선바다 데네기 토네 지나 근데 지려 바체 로아 덴비 리버디 템퍼처스 리버디 데미 마노와 근데 딱다치 임바체 고레스 네 리버디 바사데 마노와 딱다 임 딱다
저는 계획 받대 양 그는 양사 바뀌기
네 여바도 멤버 니가도 데네 나소나 예서데 에디뉴 데디 the order the candle de Jig Matomino order the Niga Niga do the bed me called Midayos at Takarina Ajele Yandapa said Manoa Takachi for a course for it. Matamazuki, some that Pajiba, Lujiba said Marco Manova, Riba the Temba, Riba the Temba said Manoa Tatachi as Kohore. At the Titi, Matembe, Riba Temper Charles in the Nige Manova, Tatachi or Hessish.
The third and fourth lines, first examine your own mind, then consistently do what is appropriate. First examine your own mind. To this point has been made both of the preceding lines. Before engaging in physical activity or verbal activity, check your motivation. Check your motivation, and if it's afflicted, refrain from speaking, from moving, and rather spend time transforming your motivation. This is the very purpose of being a spiritual practitioner, is to change our mind. This is more important than going somewhere, saying something. And the fourth line, we need to be consistent, because to become the person we long to be, to become an exemplary spiritual practitioner, it's not enough to just reduce the expressions of our afflictions. We have to distance ourselves from them, make ourselves strangers to these afflictions. That requires consistency. So this fourth line can be translated in different ways, because the different ways this word is spelled in different editions of the text. Consistently do what is appropriate, or consistently do what is wise. But the meaning will not be so different. It comes down to using your intelligence and doing what is the wise thing to do or the appropriate thing to do, and do so consistently, not allowing particular attachment, the attachment to doing what we want. Rather, we need to refrain from that consistently. This is how change will come.
And I didn't get the door to about the more and do by near, and I'm some to get into a how do I didn't such a henshin in Tianche, the nigger cuber to about and more to be so the Kunong and it's cold to see beta, than was shishing ye, Shimju dinner, Jig, how going to dinner tembe pa, and Tianche temper Tianche Sungo the Chagorua, didn't that on Jiggy, Jigge. Namsang as a part of Geshe the Chasa North Sanama, or the machine Tata Lesson Norn, Algo Marwa. The Jesa Dinez Nambun Dang as you do Shene, Yasi Ansilia, and Jodadi, or Drovine, Chatan you want the Mason Chichito, Hore, and Bigge, and it is Chatan you want to Sonji drove Chick Drovine, that Gia will marry some bigge, some diatom. It in that by Gishevalia, Chatan won't get may Kishena that. Tigo Matimasha, which is in a Tigo Maresembe, do some Yane Yadu and the Munity, some Tavina, then Quakishia don't drag cancel it. I'm sorry, the Jemba Tiada, shishing it at jail, that temper, Jayala, so one. And the Munity Negiasi do some Madonna, Naji Jayala, Habucharua, in Zade and Humara, that they are seeing the Munity in the Madrova in that. Kishimasheva in that Suzuki, that's also Jibuti, the Kablia, or that Gawa draw in a misot, Danish draw in a Kunolia, then your mobile want them dancing Tokyo Mare, your mobile or some Korea Mare, says some dialogues of Kishev in a Chaldang in your mobile want to Kulong, Kunia, Nachishanlia, Kishina, that your Mare, Dishi, your Mare, and better, when the Yane Yadu in some now, Comshiru Surveyna, and they are Chicky draw and Kishev Kablanam's order, Chick Pat, Jenny, Janky. And they go up regular Jahalia, Lela, Genturwa, and the Shishin there. And the unity some mother when that they take Rodio Kabla, Kishe, Kablamsa, the 10 to the Kalakaburwa. Chisa in that and the unit, the Jambe, Shishin, Jambe, to shit, Jala, Soyane, and to shit, Jala Sobat. The Nigita, the Nigi, Jugita, Shike, Yomo, on the son part, draw on Sobat, Tamo, on Sobanet, Gay about the Nodrimba. And the Rashi got the New York by the Gandhi, who says some time on the Denigi, Pembes and Bukunia lunch here, and the read passion and a drawing, Shana drawing at the Gambia, Transhinigal, the Manu by the Hembody, Jungo by the Dushin, Pando, Yagodo Assembly, Denigi some Diade and Dushin, some down computer Vena, and you get that Dushin, Dene, draw down Maui Kabla, and Temper to Eddie, on to Edgewater. In Zada. Chazam, and do see where Chagorwada.
To be aware of our motivation at all times is difficult. Before engaging in movement or engaging in speech, to be aware of our motivation and to have corrected it where necessary, this is difficult to do. But this shows the importance of developing mindfulness and vigilance. What, as Buddhist practitioners, we need to be constantly aware of our mind, not constantly caught up in speech and things that we are hearing and things that we are seeing. But we need to be aware of how our mind is reacting to that. Because then we will be aware of whether it's our afflictions that are drawing us towards them, repelling us, or if our motivation in that moment is in accordance with our general motivation. This is difficult to do, but it can be done if one applies oneself consistently, being aware with vigilance of our mind, no matter what we are doing, and then mindfulness keeping us, bringing us back to virtuous ways of thinking. But this involves being aware of a way of thinking, no matter what we are doing. And first of all, especially when we're starting out, but this will last for a while, we will at times act or speak in ways that are not ideal or not appropriate. Recognize this and continue. Gain that balance of both not making excuses and dismissing speaking or acting inappropriately, but also not beating ourselves up, giving ourselves a hard time. See both of those as an extreme, too harsh or too relaxed. Learn from one's mistakes and move forward. Change, because of the depth of habituation we have to the affliction, change is not immediate, but it comes about through consistent effort that is light. The mind must be diligent, but it also needs to be light, not taking circumstances and our responses to them particularly serious. In this way, we can be consistent without being overly relaxed nor overly tight. And in this way, then, lasting change will come through developing habits. Because the mind needs to be light, needs to be joyous. Then we will move forward, cultivating new good habits. And the way to bring this about is in the morning, before the commencement of your day's activities, generate a good motivation. Ideally, a motivation that arises in your heart rather than just an expression of words. And also, don't leave it at that. Throughout the day, remind yourself briefly of that motivation. Because then it's much easier to ensure that your behavior and your speech is in accordance with that motivation. And in this way, by keeping your speech and your behavior in accordance with your motivation, you will be spiritually developing, and your interactions with others will be meaningful too. You will have a meaningful impact on others too.
na liang ba sai di pa sai la so pa de yong lo che za nyo mo ba ke di pa ko cho tham ji du ka ba na ka sha ba na de ne di nga ji ge jawa di ngi wi jawa chi li chu ro ro ke we jawa pen bi jawa ji di pen bi jawa chu ro ba na je ba na so so ya lang le pen ba xian le pen ba an di je bu an ke we le sa ji ma ba na de ji yong de che ko ro de ne za da ji cho tham ji ne nyo mo ba ke di pa ji ka ne ska o de ta shi cho ha ji to ne du shi nyo mo ba ke di ka ya di du ska o re se su ro ba pe ne de ji ya ji ge de me tam do na mi be tam na ngo se bi do na mi be de mo ta ba ne ka yo re sin de le ke ne cha fa je ne an ji ke no ji nyo mo ba de ge ya ne ya de ta tin ni she ba ne ce cha fa de ya ne du ya pe du ko re sa chi du se de ne ge 那样这个 Yeah, and I do not maybe a Sako or Sopa that Dinigi and Zamumba so Juba, Salaji Mojiba, Amara Chedivana, and Digi Dusine, and Sayegi, and the Majis Sunship of the Gadan Kagores. He might have been a doing maybe a Sako or that, Mazumi Maton, Sanali, Busin Changa, Mario. Chedadazus Sadus Dagastoname Coban, Pusse again, Yangamangua, and the Zangumbuchevene, Zangumbuche, Delia, and a team. Chiki Zangumbuti, Dinala Busin Mamboyo Sigre, Timembe, that Zangumbuti, Aji, Mamban Shanley, a paddy, Meva Suicide, Sissing Las of a day, Mumboyana, Mazukoyule, Pingor, this year Campus Meza, Meva Suina, Nechi Koyole, never knew what the names are, Dosine, Jezadinigi, Minerva, at Yom Divomasa Dona, and the names Sanji Katama gave it to Dosine, and Chisung said. She's not how draw about that Tamora because Chatan you won't get Shebana. Then it and the Chatan you won't get the Tamawa and draw lots of it in the DJ. The Yavachu, your Mardu, as Mother Marva. She's a Rajan, you can never show good. She's a Chatan, won't get son, Chawadi and Nampa chase him. And then she Rajan, you can never deeper savage in the younger. She's a the names up. As Mauba that you do want your Kuchago, this Chasan to check your mares. Chadandala. You do in chamber to Tinigi, Benitana, Tam Shevada, Mosavi, Demotena, Kuan Gariore, and a Tando Hardu, the Kuan Dinet in the Yunguda, Sabat was the Kuan Toya Tanosopa. The Nig Demi Peggy, and then Chizako, and Sako, La Switch and Dana, but in Jenna, Tincheven and Sanji, Kataka, Gord, the Nigi, and Chigi, Tina Busimo was said in Diva Sagure, the Nigi Diva Savata, Gana gave it Diva Chevina. In the moment, the Tibutunga Chagiratini, Yakumindua, some Chigme, some bad. Ajiking a chata, you won't get Tamoa, and the nigger drawn Chichavina, the Russian you can neglect in your more Shangortins and Timaria, some big, the Nigi, Gun or Chicken, Dache, and then the Chigme, some big douche and somebody, Yane, Ado douche, some Davina, and on you get any Comshi Savana, D. Change and Anjugate, and your mom by the Chok Tamden, Kielpa, Gokayumburg, Gaya, go what the Niki.
Summarize these verses we looked at tonight. We all want happiness. None of us want to suffer in any way. The suffering, all our suffering comes from the affliction. These afflictions that also impede our attainment of lasting happiness. And these afflictions, when they are expressed, that bring suffering to others too. So if we rely well on mindfulness and vigilance, if we train ourselves to rely well on mindfulness and vigilance, we will ensure that our mind stays on virtue and therefore is unafflicted. And if our mind is virtuous, our resulting physical behavior and speech will also be virtue and bring benefit to others as well. Moreover, by ensuring that our mind stays virtuous, we weaken our affliction. So we do two things by relying on mindfulness and vigilance. We strengthen our habituation to virtue and thereby create the causes for happiness, and we weaken our habituation to affliction and thereby we greatly reduce the accumulation of non-virtue. So then, to bring it specifically to some of the points raised tonight, encourage you in particular to look at this first verse that we looked at tonight, because this is very relevant in our modern world. Watch how many of our conversations fall into the category of being of no real meaning, no real value, being pointless. And watch for how one is drawn to entertainment. These various forms that are so readily available, that are just their arm's length away, and how they captivate our mind, and how difficult it is to turn away. There we see the attachment, how we are stuck to that entertainment. These faults we need to recognize by seeing just what we could be achieving in this life, rather than what this entertainment or these pointless conversations lead to. and recognize that this entertainment really has no value. But not only does it have no value, it means this opportunity that this life presents will not be fulfilled. You need to recognize this and remind yourself of it again and again, because one's entire life, one's culture, has pushed us in this direction that seems noble and so easily justified. In this investigation, also remind yourself of what has meaning, what has benefit. See how your mind feels when it's engaging in virtue. When you've meditated on love, when you've meditated on impermanence or emptiness, you can feel this joy in your heart, this space in your heart. How different that is from what is called a pleasurable entertainment. And then develop the determination to let go of what limits one, and rather turn one's attention to what has lasting value. From the second purpose we looked at, these illustrations, we take them quite broadly, because on one hand, one can imagine if one is scratching in the soil, one may well be hurting small insects though, and bringing pain to others. But another way to look at this is to see such thoughtless activity, such inattentive activity, as an expression of not really valuing our environment. And our environment matters in many ways, but one is that others, that other life forms, rely on our natural environment in ways that we do not easily recognize. We think of insect life, and even in its tiniest forms, it relies on this natural world completely, and in ways that we don't readily recognize. So this then encourages us to take responsibility for our environment, to care for our environment, not just within our current home, but in that of general use, to treat it with respect, recognizing that it is the very source of life, the home and source of life for beings. And in this process, something we covered in the last verse, be very aware of your mental approach to try and get all times a balanced approach. Do not be overly relaxed with yourself, nor tight and rigid. Also, with others, rather be accepting. Do not be judgmental. Because when the mind of criticism yet again arises, whether directed at yourself or at others, let that affliction go. There's no need to criticize oneself for acts. Rather, bring your mind away from the affliction such as that, back to virtuous minds, such as reminding yourself of the good qualities of that person you're criticizing, whether in yourself or others. Develop a sense of appreciation and care towards others. And in this way, one lets go of these negative impressions that we have of others, and these negative attitudes we may have towards ourselves. This process presented here tonight, the more you apply your self-truths, the more wholesome you will become as a person, the greater at ease you'll be with yourself, the more comfortable you'll be with who you are as a person, the greater the beneficial impact you have on those around you. And in this way, as you grow spiritually, your afflictions, which perhaps have dominated you so in this light, they will reduce in strength and in habituation and duration, and will eventually become strangers to you. All of this will come about through training in a way that is balanced, but also that is consistent. They can conclude their concern.